Hey guys, Mike the Manic Geek here, and today we're going to try a little bit of an experiment, something of a PC build, but this is more or less a will it fit kind of experiment here. So this all is the Manic Mrs. PC that we got shipped out from Florida out to Oregon where we are now, and it occurred to me that the case that she had been using, the 760T, doesn't really make a lot of sense for our living situation right now, so I wanted to see if I can get all of this to fit in the Rosewill Bradley M. This is an ATX mid-tower that they released a little while back. Wanted to do some content on it for a while, but life kept on getting in the way, so it was really difficult for me to do a proper review on it. So I figured I'd go ahead and get all of our hardware in this case and see if it will actually fit. Now for the power supply, I'm also going to be using the Rosewill Valens M. This is a semi-modular power supply with the ATX 24-pin and the EPS 12-volt cable already installed. Unfortunately, the 24-pin ATX is ketchup and mustardy, but that's not really such a huge deal in this case. Just to go over some of the rest of the hardware specs here real quick, we are still using a 990FX platform, unfortunately. Just don't have the money to upgrade right now. This is an MSI 990FX, a GD65 motherboard. We're also using an EVGA GeForce GTX 970 card. This is the ACX 2.0 model. For memory, we're going to be using 8 gigabytes of Avexor Radeon memory. This is DDR3, rated at 2133 megahertz. For solid-state storage, we have a Crucial, I want to say this is an M500 SSD, I could be wrong on that, but it is a 128 gig model. I've been using this since it first came out, and the Manic Mrs. inherited this for her computer. It's still running strong, still has really fast read-write speeds on it, and it's really all she needs for her use case scenario. Now for backup storage, we have a 500 gig Seagate Barracuda drive. This guy's kind of long in the teeth by now. The storage isn't really quite what it should be, but again, she doesn't really have a whole lot of games that she regularly plays, and for the type of storage that she does, this is still going to be plenty for her needs. And to dress things up a little bit on the inside, we do have an NZXT Hue Plus module here, but this guy right here is going to be the main point of contention. Basically, if I can't get this to fit, then this whole thing is going to be foobar. This is the Riven Oranos 140mm fan CPU cooler. I did a review on this for the channel a little while back. It's an awesome heatsink. I really, really like this. But it's 161 millimeters in height. And the Bradley M here reportedly only supports 160 millimeter tall heat sinks. So we're basically going to see if that one extra millimeter is actually going to make the difference between being able to get this all to fit inside that case. So without further ado, let's get this whole thing started. Alright, so while I have the case open and all the panels off, I figured I'd go ahead and quickly touch on some of the features on the inside of the case here. So this is an ATX mid-tower, so you are capable of housing a standard with ATX case. Sorry, nothing EATX in here, but frankly, if you're rocking an EATX motherboard, you're probably not going to be going with something as inexpensive as a Bradley M to house it in anyway. The case does come equipped with 3 fans, one non-LED fan at the back, and 2 blue LED fans in the front, all 3 of which are 120 millimeter. You can also fit 2 more 120 millimeter fans in the roof, as well as a slim 240 millimeter radiator from something like an all-in-one cooler. And you can see it is offset away from the center of the roofline. However, do keep in mind that you are going to need low-profile DIMMs in order to accommodate an all-in-one liquid cooling solution up here. So something like these Radeon DIMMs are very clearly not going to work to that end because, I mean, look at that. That is ludicrously tall. There is no way. Yeah, there's just no way. As far as hard drive accommodations are concerned, you can hold up to 3 3.5-inch drives and 2 2.5-inch drives, and that's the specific combination you can use, because as you can see, the 3.5-inch drive bays are only compatible with 3.5-inch drives. You're definitely not going to be fitting 2.5 inches in there. Matter of fact, I'm fairly certain you wouldn't even be able to use one of the 3.5-inch bay adapters that usually comes with something like a solid-state drive, just because of the mounting solution that's used here. So, a little disappointed in that lack of flexibility, but again, at this price point, you can't really complain too much. Now, as far as the way these caddies are held into place, they do have thumb screws that typically hold them in. However, they do also snap into place and have latches at the back to hold them in. So even if you're missing one of the thumb screws, this one actually went missing during the move. There's not really anything to worry about, at least if only one of them is missing, because really it's just this roof-mounted one underneath the optical drive bays that you'd really need to have the screw on to make sure everything stays in place. But this one stays pretty firmly in place with you know, a fair amount of effort required to get that off. So I wouldn't really be too concerned about this coming loose, even if you are missing the thumb screws. Now, as I mentioned, this does have two optical drive bays here, but I'm a little upset about that, and it's really one of the only things that I don't like about this case, is because you have two optical drive bays here, which that's fine and dandy for anyone that's still using those for something like a bay-mounted reservoir, a fan speed controller, or something like that, or even a first-gen NZXT Hue. But from the outside, you can only access one of them. So this bottom one isn't accessible at all. And the main issue I have with that is that if this wasn't here, you would still be able to mount an additional 240mm radiator in the front of this case, because you can actually set these fans in between the case and the front panel here to give you all the room you'd need for a slim radiator. Personally, it's just something of a little bit of a missed opportunity here. Realistically, again, if you're wanting to go with that kind of water cooling, you're probably not considering something like this. But if a feature like that would have been present on a case this inexpensive, honestly, that would have really shaken up this particular price point for chassis on the market, and I think it would have gotten a lot more of the lower end cases being capable of accommodating more water cooling solutions. Now, as far as the front panel itself is concerned, it does have a decent amount of perforation through the front here to allow a lot of breathing. You also have some perforations on the side right here to get more airflow coming through. Unfortunately, there is no dust filter for the front of the case. And in fact, the only dust filter that you get is one that mounts on the roof, and quite frankly, I'm not really a fan of this particular implementation, and this is really the only other thing that I don't actually like about this case. It's not that the dust filter is bad or anything, it's the mounting solution for it that really bothers me. These clips, these have always been problematic for me, and in fact, if I pull up one of the other ones here, we can see that this one actually broke off while I was trying to remount this back on the case, and in fact, there are two others that have had this exact thing happen to them, and the other problem is these pop out with so much force because they're essentially spring-loaded because of the tension that's placed on them, that I've lost it somewhere on the ground out here, never to be seen again. So now I only have 3 of the clips to hold that dust filter in place. I'm still gonna have it set in the roof of the case just to keep any dust from settling on the inside of the computer, but that's just something that's just something I really wish that there would have been a little bit more thought put into, because again, the dust filter itself isn't really all that bad, but even if you wanted to move this into the front of the case somehow, you're then dealing with a really restrictive front intake, and the rest of the computer's not really going to breathe all that well, even considering that these fans actually do move a really good amount of air and run extremely quiet. Just to really quickly touch on the front I/O as well, we do have power and reset buttons here with nice clicky tactile buttons. They're a little small and they're a little out of the way, which I actually kind of prefer because it minimizes the likelihood that anyone's going to accidentally push these and screw up whatever's going on in your computer at the time. You do also have 2 USB 3 ports and your microphone and headphone jack. You do also have a prominently featured Rosewill logo here, as well as your power activity light. Kind of wish that was a little more subdued, but again, that, you know, there's no accounting for personal taste here, so you know, take my opinion on that with a grain of salt. Ultimately, the front of the case still looks, admittedly, kind of cool. Yeah. I don't really have a problem with that. And then of course for your PCI expansion slots, there are no thumb screws here, womp womp. But there are thumb screws for the side panels, and they are in fact captive thumb screws. This was something that I wasn't really expecting on a case at this price point, and I'm really, really glad that Rosewill is starting to include this even on their more low-cost case lineups. That's really nice. Again, it's something that I've mentioned before. This is kind of a take it or leave it thing for me personally, but it is nice to see that this has trickled down into the $50 price point, and I really like seeing that. The side panels are also dished to give you a bit more room for cable management in the back of the case. They are fairly rigid as well. You don't really get a whole lot of flex in these, which is really nice, because once these go back on the case, the whole thing becomes surprisingly rigid and solid feeling. So I'm not really too concerned about the long-term usability of a product like this. Now for the front panel, which is much lighter because you do have the cutout here, you do have a pretty decently sized window, so you can see into the inside of the case right here. Hi guys. Again, it's not tempered glass or anything like that, and it doesn't give you a full view of the inside, but that's a pretty good size, and really I have no complaints there, again, especially at 50 bucks. Now, as previously mentioned, I am using a Valens M power supply here. This is a 600 watt unit. It is 80 plus gold certified, so it's going to be nice and easy on the power bill there with a lot of high efficiency, and this is realistically more than enough for what we need for the parts that we're using for this particular build. I have had this up and running before, just sort of powering the case fan so I could test those and see how well they worked, what the airflow was like and everything. And so far, it's a really quiet running power supply. All the cables are really good quality, again, except for this ketchup and mustardy ATX 24-pin cable. Honestly, I don't really understand why that cost was cut. I mean, all the rest of the cables here are flat black cables. Even if this one wasn't a flat cable, just make all of these cables black. But again, that's really nitpicky stuff, and for that being the only ketchup and mustardy cable, I'm kind of okay with that. So, without further ado, let's get some hardware in here and see if we can make it all fit. Yeah. Alright, so the build's been completed and we've been using it in this form for about a week now. So we'll go ahead and gloss over some of my impressions on both the case and the power supply here, starting with the power supply. The Valens 600M is, in short, a really solid power supply. It provided clean power the entire time we've been using it under our typical gaming loads of games like World of Warcraft, Diablo 3, Fallout 4, and 3. All of the cables slid into and out of the modular openings on the body of the power supply really easily. There was no undue resistance when plugging any of the connectors into our motherboard or graphics card headers. The fan runs quietly at all times, and really, there's not really much else to say, especially given that I don't have the means to properly do more scientific testing on the power supply to determine how clean the power delivery actually is on this. But given the experiences that we've had here, I can confidently say that the Valens will probably be a good selection for most of your building needs out there, especially if you're going with a single graphics card solution, and especially if you're looking for a good 80 plus gold semi-modular power supply that doesn't really destroy your wallet in the process. Plus, the fact that it's got a 3-year warranty on it is pretty nice. Realistically, if anything's gonna go wrong with your power supply, it's probably gonna happen within 3 years of usage. And really, by that time, you're gonna be looking to upgrade your platform anyway. So really, I kind of feel like that hits a nice median point for what you should be expecting as a consumer and what you actually get out of this power supply. So now that that bit's out of the way, let's discuss the case. As you guys can probably tell from the inside here, I was not able to fit the Oranos cooler in this case. but it wasn't because of just 1 millimeter of clearance issues that I had. There were actually several millimeters of heatsink that would have been protruding out of the case. Now, if this bulge had lined up correctly with where the integrated heat spreader lines up on your motherboard and on your processor, that wouldn't have been a problem. But because this bulge doesn't come up enough, you really don't actually have room for anything taller than a 155 millimeter heatsink. This unfortunately leaves off the table the venerable Hyper 212 Evo, which has sort of become that staple go-to bang for the buck air cooler heatsink for most cost-conscientious builds out there. And it's kind of a shame because really that cooler would have been a perfect fit for a case like this. But because the side panel bulge doesn't really line up with any realistic heatsink mounting that's out there, you're really not going to be able to fit anything. And personally, I would only recommend coolers as tall as 150 millimeters in height, just to make sure you've got ample enough room to comfortably maneuver everything into the case without running into any sort of odd clearance or installation issues in the process. As a result of all that, we wound up having to go with a Be Quiet Pure Rock Slim heatsink, which I'll go into more detail with in another video. But suffice it to say, that has wound up being a much more effective solution for an environment like this. I find it interesting, however, that you would have to make that kind of compromise with an air cooler, but that you can still fit a 240 millimeter all-in-one heatsink in here if you wanted to go that route. Now bear in mind, even with the offset fan mounts up here, you will still need to use low profile DIMMs in order to accommodate a 240 millimeter all-in-one liquid cooler, which means that the Raiden DIMMs that we have for this build are really not suited for that kind of cooling solution. But if you were to go with something like Corsair's LPX DIMMs, then absolutely you'd be able to get away with an all-in-one solution, or you'd probably even be able to get away with one of EK's aluminum series, like the A240G solution. If you had something like a GTX 1060 in here and like a Z270 platform, you'd be able to get everything underwater just using that kit and still fit it all into this case. Again, they're interesting cooling compromises that you have to make with regard to component cooling in here, but they're not all the end of the world, and there are still reasonable solutions out there that have good pricing to performance ratios associated with them. Now, as far as the supplied fans are concerned, all three of them moved really good amounts of air, they run relatively quietly, and the two blue LED fans up front put out a nice, clean, even blue LED lighting, and there weren't any dead LEDs on these fans when I got them in. Interestingly enough, they do get powered off of either Molex or a 3-pin power connector. I wound up going with the Molex connectors in this case just because A, I wanted them to run at a constant speed. 2, I was also running an NZXT Hue Plus in here because I wanted to see if I could actually mount some LED lighting comfortably on the inside of this case. Ultimately, I would avoid using LED strips in here, mostly because the way the offset fans are set in the roof, plus the limited amount of space along the edges of the inside of the case, there's really not any way to comfortably mount LED strips, and I was only able to get one strip mounted facing sideways in this top gap up here. And if I was to mount fans up here, those fans would be blocking a lot of the light from reaching any of the internals of the case. And as it is, the LED strip is really only illuminating the top half of the case here. So if you wanted to get some illumination on the inside of this case, I would stick to LED fans. Now, on the topic of the Hue Plus, this brings me to a little foible that I had with the SSD mounting caddies. You can mount an SSD, technically, either using the side threaded openings or the bottom threaded openings on your 2.5-inch drive. The problem is, if you try to use the bottom mountings, when you try to put the caddy back in place, the screws, because they don't lie flush, won't allow the caddy to actually mount in place. So for mounting the Hue Plus, I actually had to use double-sided tape on the caddy and then mount the caddy back in place. But with a solid state drive, it's not really so much of an issue. You just need to make sure you're using the side threaded openings to avoid any clearance issues with getting the caddy to sit back in place. Now, as far as cable management is concerned and a clean presentation, There are no grommeted openings on the motherboard tray, so unfortunately you are still going to see any of your cables that are running past those openings. But as far as actually managing the cables is concerned, I was actually able to get some really clean cable management going on here. Especially if you're willing to get a little unorthodox with it and use some of the punched openings that are on the outside edge of the motherboard tray that are there likely from manufacturing purposes and likely due to some varying internal layouts that this chassis is capable of accommodating. But all said and done, it actually didn't take me very long to get this cable management going the way I did. And if I took a little bit more time, I probably could have got it even cleaner than I already did. That being said, I would advise against attempting to use cable extensions in this case, because all that's going to do for you is create this cable management nightmare and make it even more difficult to get the side panel on. And that's actually a relative strong point here, is that with the cables managed the way I have them, this side panel goes back on effortlessly, like shockingly so. And especially considering that all the side panels have captive thumb screws in them, it made it that much easier for me to reassemble everything and get back to actually using the computer. So really at the end of it all, as a cost-conscientious option, the Bradley M is actually a really solid ATX mid-tower. It maintains a small footprint, surprisingly good build quality. It accommodates a good amount of storage options. You can have a pretty decently high-end card in here and not really worry about it starving for air. You can actually fit a custom liquid cooling solution in here if you went with something like the EK Aluminum Series kits. And the pricing for it isn't going to break the bank. You still get a window to see into the interior, granted it's not tempered glass, but really at this price point, if you were getting tempered glass, it would probably be dangerously thin. You will admittedly have to deal with a lack of dust filtration in the front of the case and will need to be more mindful of dust buildup over the long period of using this, but ultimately, that's one of those little compromises that at this price point, you should expect to make. And really, I don't think it's an entirely unreasonable one here. So at the end of the day, the Bradley M definitely gets a thumbs up from me. So guys, that's gonna wrap it up for this video. Give me a thumbs up if you liked it. Let me know down in the comments what you thought about the power supply and the case here. Also, let me know what some of the ideas you guys would have for some parts lists to go in this case. I'd love to see what some of your thought processes are with this. And until next time, take it easy.